Hi there. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri, and I work as a coach and also an advisor to organizations and individuals who are seeking to upskill their entire workforce or just really rethink their career strategy. In this particular podcast, I bring to you some really incredible guests who live this life, which in my book I've defined as Career 3.0, where they bring in multiple things from their life. Their hobbies become mainstream, it becomes a source of revenue, their passions in many other fields which are unconnected to what we really think of them as. That becomes another source of revenue, and they're just leading far more interesting lives. And this is the world that we live in because, as we know, artificial intelligence is going to change a number of things about our careers. It is going to change the way that we live, the way that we work, and we just really need to rethink our career using completely different yardsticks than what we've built before. So without any further ado, let me bring my guests on. Elliott Masie, one of the things when I was sort of really thinking about how to introduce you, I kind of thought that this is going to be really confusing because I sort of know you in two different avatars of yours. One is, of course, I know that you're the person who's coined this term e-learning, which has sort of really created a specialization in human resources by itself. E-learning is really, you're the man who's done that. You've done it over the years, defined the profession. But there's another side of yours, which is far more interesting to me, which is that I know that you were nominated for a Tony Award, and that was for a Broadway show. And you've done several Broadway shows, which, as I've mentioned there, what should I describe you as? As a person who's into e-learning or what? I mean, and your site actually says that you are a researcher, educator, analyst, and speaker.
Well, I think the word that pulls it together for me, my friend, is storytelling. I am passionate. All my life, I've been passionate about the power of the story. And if we think about what we've done in learning and training from when we did it in a classroom, when we do it on a virtual experience, when we do it in a module, in each instance, we are helping to create a story that ignites, enables, and empowers the learner. Well, on Broadway, we're doing the same thing. We're putting an experience on stage that will ignite and motivate and inspire the audience. And ironically, there's much we can learn from each of these arenas. So what links it together for me, other than that I am clinically unable to do just one thing at a time, is that I wanted a duality in my career and my life. So it became the world of learning with technology and then the world of Broadway. And we've now produced 41 Broadway and off-Broadway shows. So a great honor to be in both of these worlds.
Which is a typical term that I've used in my book, which is saying Career 2.0, which is two different passions, two different ecosystems, both are monetized. And how do you build that capability? Because when you started your career, what did you really want to be and how did you make those choices? And the origin story, as they say.
I was probably one of those people that today would be defined as a special education student. I was a challenging student. I was curious. I was born with a speech defect, but I overcame that. And I was always interested in the dynamics of what happened in a room, at our house, in the park. And it led me to an interest in both the psychology of what we do as groups, and that was right next to what we do as we pull together for learning. And early on, I became a geek and a nerd. I went to a technical school for boys in New York City way back in 1967. I was given some technology training by IBM there for what were little mini computers. So I had this dual interest. How do people work and how does technology work? They merged together into an interest, first and foremost about learning, and then with a focus on how does technology change that? And before doing what I did in e-learning, I was very involved in helping to build the computer training industry. And I worked with Lotus and IBM. I worked at Microsoft. I worked with, you don't remember the name anymore, but WordPerfect, and all around this concept that as new technology came out, we would have to understand and learn how it worked. And probably one of the premier moments was when Bill Gates asked me to be the host of Microsoft Television for 9 months on the rollout of Windows 95. And every month I went to Seattle and we did a 2-hour satellite show for geeks, nerds, and programmers around the world on the upcoming Windows 95. And I probably expressed my freedom back then when I told Bill Gates, you can't script me, program me, or pay me. I would like to do it, and I'll do it in my own style. But it was a wonderful experience. And that later on led to the world of e-learning.
How would you have described yourself if you were on my show that day versus today? What has changed?
Well, the internet is what changed. We had what we might call e-learning before the internet. It had other words, computer-based training, or we sometimes called it a mainframe tutorial. But when the internet happened, suddenly the opportunity that we could connect individuals anywhere, anytime, and in that connection, we could give them a set of tools and resources, whether they be live or they be asynchronous, to do learning. That became the wow. I had a meeting with the senior executives at IBM, and they had been pushing and somewhat trying to coin that they owned the phrase e-business, and we knew about email and e-commerce. So I said, well, what about e-learning? And I thought that would be wonderful. And the senior executives liked it, but the marketing people said, nah, that'll never take. And I said, okay, I don't want to own it, but I'll just start using it in the public domain. And that was sort of the beginning of that phrase. And it was literally in the first 5 years of 1990s. And it stuck. And e-learning is really different today. We never would have thought that you and I could be in front of computers far away and do a synchronous, produced moment like this. So really, it was about how will technology connect? And the E changes. It could be electronic, but more importantly, it could be enthusiastic. It could be everywhere, anybody. It can evolve. And so it's been a very exciting journey to look at how we build it. And by the way, the journey is just beginning, as we think about what the role of AI will be, what the role of robotics will be, of wearables. I think this is going to be a process that continues to evolve for the next decades, if not hundreds of years.
So I like the way that you described it. You say that E could stand for many things. It could be everywhere. It could be,
Everyone.
Any word, everyone. And now you're also saying that AI is going to change learning also, which I completely agree. What is going to be different? What are some of the things that organizations are not doing today, which they should be doing?
Well, I'm going to use an interesting analogy here. If you all remember back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you probably remember going to a restaurant with 4 of your friends and they gave you the menu and you ordered the dish. 10, 15 minutes later, the waiter or waitress brought the dish. I challenge when that happened the last time, because now you go to the restaurant with 4 of your friends and immediately they go, but can we get a different bread? And can I have that sandwich without that sauce? And could you make sure it's not got protein in it or not have glutens? And in other words, we have become a society of customization where we want, and I totally accept it, and I'm one of them, we want things optimized for how we want that. I really believe that the next stage in learning is that we can provide a lot of customization and a lot of targeting of what people want. And I'll give you a good analogy of this. Let's say you are walking somewhere in your neighborhood and you will see some people who are working in their jobs, and they could be very professional jobs or clerical jobs, mechanical jobs, sanitation jobs. And my guess is many of those people, if you ask them, aspire to do something different. I may have used the word more, but you know what? Very few of them want to go back to school. Very few of them want to take a course, but they would like to get better at a skill and get better in their career. So what I think is coming, and I think this will be AI, I think it will be a change in how we think about the marketplace and the job marketplace, will be the ability for people to continually be learning and gaining the skills needed to do the next thing that they do, whether it be in their current job, current organization, current city, current career. And I don't believe that it's going to just emulate courses. I think it's going to be much more experiential, much more personalized, opportunity for people to practice, opportunity for people to collaborate. And I think AI will put that in there. I also think our social media will put it in there. And ultimately, I think we are going to have very different models of what a life of careers is going to be. Your 3.0 may become 10.0 as we think about all of the chapters of what our careers will be.
I'm intrigued about your passion for Broadway. How did that start? Were you into theater and everything in school and college, or you sort of really became a producer? Yeah, not necessarily in acting. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. Don't ask me to act. Don't ask me to sing. And please, for the most part, stop me from dancing. I was already producing conferences. Over the years, I did 29 conferences on learning that we literally had hundreds of thousands of people from around the world. So I understood what was involved. If you want to produce a great event, you've got to have an agenda. You've got to have a culture of trust. You have to deal with the cycle of excitement and boredom that people have. And I've always enjoyed going to theater. I'm not an actor. And producing the conference is like anything where you bring people together. You have to create an environment, a culture. You wanted to have engagement. You need to have trust. And I'd always been interested in theater, but never thought about a role there as a professional in that. And one day it dawned upon me, well, maybe all my skills of producing conferences have a little bit to do with producing a Broadway show. And so I reached out to a Broadway producer who was very excited, not only to have me involved, but to have me write a check as part of being a producer. And we immediately connected, and he validated that that was something that I had a passion for. And so over the years, I've done more and more Broadway shows. And sometimes as a Broadway producer, you're involved in everything. Most of the time in my role, I'm involved in putting money in conversations about marketing, in conversations about what the culture of the show will be. Eventually, you are on the board of directors of that show. And I have learned so much from the world of Broadway that, by the way, I wish we brought into the world of work. I mean, a good example, on Broadway, every time you go to see a Broadway show, there are 4 to 5 people backstage prepared on 5 minutes notice to take over the role of somebody who might get sick on the stage. Well, we don't have that. We learned in the pandemic that we don't necessarily have that. Broadway shows do lots of rehearsals where we literally go, too many songs, take that song out, or let's change this, or let's pick up the pace. I wish in the world of learning that we did more of that rehearsal and beta testing and the like. And then finally, Broadway shows have an arc. You know, they are either 90 minutes long, or maybe they're 2 hours and 10 minutes with an intermission. So you've got to build your story with an arc. And if it doesn't have an arc, people fall asleep or leave, or they certainly don't tell their friends to come there. So I've been able to apply my world of learning to Broadway. And I've been doing more and more to take what we do in Broadway and bring it back into the world of learning and talent.
You sort of made one transition of your skills. The way I look at it is in my book, Career 3.0, I talk about the fact that how do you take your skills from one ecosystem and take it into another. So you took your ideas on learning, computer-based learning, and all of that to produce conferences, which is like a adjacency, if you will. So it's similar, but not identical. Then you take a completely different field and bridge them together. So connecting the dots on completely different fields, which is harder to do, and are the processes different?
No, they're both difficult to do, because what you have to do with them is you have to take a skill you have and transform it. Very often you have to use different language. So I find that's one of the most interesting elements of that. And you have to recalibrate or retune your expectations. One of the things we know in the world of Broadway that I don't think we know as well in the world of learning is that it's not about getting it finished and delivering it. It's about absolutely impacting, delighting, and getting performance out of the audience. I wish we brought that same standard. Let's think about onboarding that happens in organizations all around the world. And we do it because we've got to do it from the legal and HR and talent point of view. But do we always evaluate whether or not the audience got it? I bet if we did, we would do a very different approach to onboarding. But a lot of when you shift these roles is you've got to leave your arrogance behind. I went from where many, many, many people knew me in the learning world, where nobody knew me in the Broadway world, and so you leave your arrogance behind. You have to become a learner. And so I spent lots of time learning, going to watch shows, talking to producers, getting to know students of theater. And then finally, you need to radically translate what you believe are your core best competencies. So what I know in the world of e-learning is different than what I know in the world of Broadway. So you have to be able to do a pivot shift. But for me, that's kind of not too difficult, because if you're collaborative, then you call on the people or colleagues or organizations that can extend and cover those parts where you're a beginner or just a learner.
I want to sort of understand this whole process a little more. You are really successful in the world of learning, and you get into a different ecosystem where you're not known. You're a nobody. You're kind of really starting at the bottom of the ladder. Is the process of learning when you're an expert different from the way of learning when you are a beginner and novice? Or are the processes similar? As a learning guru, what do you say to that?
And I accept people who use that word guru or master or something like that. I can feel honored by it. What I kind of view is that I've got deep experience, I've got high degrees of self-confidence, and I have a brand that people get. And bluntly, when you have those things, you can get away with crap, to be honest, meaning because people expect that what you say will be right. I remember one time I went to give a speech. About 5 minutes into the speech, I realized they expected me to do a very different speech than I was doing. And I kind of shifted, but I made it funny and the like. And everybody thought they had a great time. And I went, oh, wow, I should have really prepared better for that. But because of my familiarity or brand, I get away with it. You move into another field and suddenly they're not looking at you in a meeting. They don't know you because they went to your conference or saw you on television or read your 12 books. So your self-confidence is down, your brand is down. What I find you have to do, and this is my advice to all the people who read your book and watch this, and I know you and I resonate with it, ironically, don't become an expert. Become a voracious learner. Become a learner. You see, when I'm a learner, I actually get expertise points. So in the Broadway world, I would go into a meeting and somebody would say, wow, what we're going to really do is a totally different way of laying out the stage and doing that. And I go, wow, I've never done that before. Can you explain to me, how does that work? And I ask 4 or 5 questions. And sure enough, in those 4 or 5 questions, a little bit of my existing expertise comes out. If I lied by going, oh yeah, I know that. Or B, if I was overwhelmed by it and going, I don't know anything about that. In both cases, I would give away my power. But when you are a voracious learner, I'm never admitting I have a weakness. I'm instead celebrating I have a curiosity, because curiosity is what gives us that thing. Now, there's one other piece that I think is enormously important. And as you mentioned this, we have to give ourselves the permission to have a soft or safe set of failures on the way to success. So if somebody would come to me and say, tell me about some learning strategies, I can give you a whole range of strategies from Fortune 500 companies over 40 years. But if somebody came to me and said, we want to bring an elephant into our show, and we've never had a live elephant in the show, what would it look like? And it's not necessarily a wedding from India in the show, but somebody injects an elephant into it. I would accept that in the process of figuring that out, we will have a failure. It may be that the elephant isn't toilet trained. It may be that the elephant makes too much noise or starts singing another song. I was moved by Leslie Odom Jr., a very famous actor from Hamilton, who came to speak at one of my learning events, who wrote about the need for us to fail our way to success. Have a safe way to fail at something, because when you fail at it and you acknowledge it and you recover from it and you adjust to it, when you succeed, you have a confidence level that's validated by failure. I don't ever want to get on an airplane in which the pilot hasn't been in a simulator where they mocked up an accident. because in fact, by failing in that simulator, God forbid I need them to save me in a crisis, they will have a higher level of that. So that's one of the differences, that when you are brand new, don't pretend to know more than you know. Walk your curiosity in a non-obnoxious, but a powerful and pervasive way.
This is one skill that you build a lot of, humility and just the ability to deal with emergent scenarios, what you might define as adaptive learning. The performing arts actually really thrives on that, because when I used to do a show on radio, one of the things that you are always prepared for is that in those days, I used to use vinyl records, and quite likely you put that on and the record skips. So what do? And so you kind of make a little pun, or you crack a joke, you kind of say something and you sing that little piece. All the while you're scrambling at the back, trying to put that thing back on track. And that really teaches you a couple of different things. It teaches you can never be prepared enough. So you rehearse and you kind of work harder on your script, and you think of, oh my God, I believe somebody experienced something even worse. Then what happens? What do you do? How do you make up for it? And how do you keep the audience experience continuous? Yeah. So that is an incredible thing to do. How do you find time to practice that, though? Because you have a full-time role, you're a successful conference producer, and you're getting into a different area. How do you manage time?
Well, some of it is you have to figure out that you don't fall in love with structure. I early on got a gift. It's not the direct answer, but it's a roundabout answer. For my second professional job, I got fired. The person that fired me was a friend. She said, "You're very, very good at what you do, but you're horrible at being an employee of a large organization." And I started to argue with her, and I agreed. And I thanked her. And we went on to become friends and go cross-country skiing together. Part of what allows me to do that is I didn't try to do that in large, gigantic infrastructures. You've worked in and out of those structures. The bigger the infrastructure, the harder it is sometimes for us to be a total outlier around our career. So I chose to be very involved in modestly small size, but high impact organizations. Conferences were perfect for me because I could do something with a team of 15 that touched 5,000 people. And so that's one of the ways. The other way is to realize that you don't have to do it all, that anything that we do, whether we're cooking a holiday dinner at home for friends and family, or we're building a gigantic new Python program, ultimately you're going to collaborate with others. I think by becoming a good collaborator, it bought me the time that you said's hard to get. And I really valued that time of being able to try things. Now, I also think, by the way, that most success isn't time-based. It's effort and creativity-based. So in some cases, you kind of think about something for a few hours, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, or even a few years, and then boom, you do it. But it wasn't that you did it on the spot. It was preceded by all the cognitive processing and all the conversations that we have with people. And finally, when we fail, it's good humor. It's funny. I mean, obviously, I don't want anyone hurt. But you're at one time, I brought one of the leading thinkers in the world of knowledge management into my conference by satellite. And I had met him, and he was amazing. And I brought him by satellite from Boston, from a major university. Now, I don't know what was wrong that day, but he was supposed to be there for 40 minutes. After 5 minutes, I was falling asleep. It was horrible. I don't know why. So I took a risk. I walked over to the head of AV and I said, move the satellite dish slowly. So within about 3 minutes, we lose the satellite feed from Boston. And so, oh no, the satellite's moving. Oh, well, I'll come and we'll do a videotape with you. And it went off. And I told the truth to the audience. I said, it wasn't his day. And I went and I did a videotape with him afterwards, and he was amazing. But sometimes it's not your day. And if you can have the courage to own when a failure happens and actually have a little bit of fun with it, I think it's wonderful. I worry in the VC market, the venture capital market, we're so wanting to become the next billion-dollar company that we often don't make enough failures along the way, because some of those failures lead you to ultimate success. That's part of my approach. have some fun with it when you fail.
You sort of touched on it. For the benefit of the audience, I'm going to summarize a couple of things. One, which struck me, was Elliott is someone who started his career in the learning space and sort of then moved on to do a little pivot and started producing conferences, and then did a gigantic shift by sort of working with his passion for Broadway, becoming a producer. In this whole process, some of the lessons that you mentioned, one was if you stay curious, it helps you to leave your ego behind. Even though you've been very successful in one ecosystem, you're a nobody in another system, and you can learn better. But while learning, the process of learning, you can still build on your previous experiences, and you don't give up your past, but you don't get overwhelmed by the fact that you don't know this new ecosystem. And that's particularly useful when you shift organizations or you shift functions within an organization, or live in a different country, or go to a different kind of a sector. The other thing that you talked about was that you didn't quite thrive in a large organization's ecosystem. Sometimes you got to really decide. In my book, I talk about work, worker, and workplace.
Yeah.
Choose the kind of workplace that helps you in the journey point where you are now in your career. And you talked about failing your way to success, which is a very interesting phase, which is that how do you create little failure points so that it's not overwhelming, it doesn't set you back completely, but you're learning enough to keep moving one pace ahead of the rest of the people. The last point, which I liked about what you said so far, and those of you who are joining me right now, I'm talking to Elliott Masie, the guy who coined the term e-learning, and as the author of 12 books. And I was asking him about his career journey. And if you want your career journey to be featured in this podcast, do drop me an email. But I also want to talk about the fact that you say that it's important to build your success through hard work. And a lot of people kind of say that it's about being in the right place at the right time. What matters more, circumstances or hard work, or it's both, or the relationships?
It's a tough one. It's sort of looking at when, a relative of yours has great soup that you like eating, to try to ask them what's the one ingredient that makes it that great soup. And they're going to tell you it's everything. I'll use some words that are similar to what you extracted from me. Intensity. I like the word intensity. Most people I know who become successful have put in intensity to that process, which may be measured in time. It may be measured in hours. It may be measured in travel. It may be measured in their own investments in that. But intensity is one of the pieces. I think another piece, and I go back to that word that you echoed from me, curiosity. I believe when I'm in that position of hiring somebody, either to work in my organization or I've been on boards of directors of companies, the number one thing I look for is the person curious. Now, we want to make sure they have the skill that they need, but I am more interested are they curious? So I always ask, what are you curious about? What are you reading right now? What confuses you in life? What's one area that you think is changing that you're going to have to change to adapt? And if I get a blah answer for that, I walk out. I'm not hiring that person. And then I think the final piece of this, and it's a tough one, and I say it with the privilege of having been successful in my career financially. I've sold some of my companies to venture capital companies. So I am all the things of somebody who can say they've been successful. I never had the objective of making a lot of money. In fact, most of the people I've met along my way, and I've gotten to know many billionaires, and a couple of my good friends are billionaires, not one of them did it to become really rich. They did it to solve a problem. I have a friend who got very involved in looking at the way in which we could do a much better job dealing with diabetes. And he ended up, Dean Kamen, who invented the Segway. He invented the diabetes pump because his brother was needing to regularly test his blood and give himself injections. I believe we should take the money out of it, meaning, yes, we want to ultimately make money, but the people who I know who are happy aren't happy because what their paycheck says. They're happy by what they are creating, by what they are part of, by what they are doing. And so don't be stupid about money. But if you define yourself by money, I don't know. That's a very risky thing. As my friend Ken Blanchard, a very famous business author, would say, is the day when we go and they put us into a box, none of your stocks, portfolios, cash, or properties go in the box with you. What goes in the box with you are the people that you've met, the relationships you've created, and the things in the world that you help to get a little bit better. So I wish, actually, we uncoupled some of our conversation about financial success and instead really looked at how do we solve problems. AI is amazing. It's going to do wonderful things. It's going to have wonderful challenges. I don't even want to read who's making a lot of money in venture on it right now. That's a casino game. What I'm really interested is the person who just yesterday said, we now have found a way in which AI can do a better reading of mammogram x-rays to rapidly let somebody know while they're still at the mammogram center whether it's a higher degree of positive or negative, and we need a follow-up. Wow. That's what turns me on in terms of where creativity comes from.
That's a beautiful expression. She was saying, I was thinking of it. I mean, instead of being financial billionaires, is there a way that we can be relationship billionaires? Where you, start to build those relationships across ecosystems. And the more diverse, the better. And I've always found interesting people are interesting because they hang around with other interesting people. They don't all sort of fry in the same pan and, they're meeting the same old guys. And if you're in the corporate world, you're particularly prone to doing this, that you're meeting people from your company, other companies, competitor companies, and you're kind of saying, oh, this is what they are doing, this is what they're competing with. Instead, if you meet with people who are in a polar opposite setup, sports people, artists, broadcasters, influencers, all kinds of interesting people, and learn about their life, you're more likely to be very successful in the work that you do because you're connecting the dots.
I was in a taxi cab a good number of years ago in Washington, D.C., and there was a gentleman there. He had come from another country. He was driving the taxi, and we had a long ride. It was about 45-minute ride. And I asked him, what did he do? And he said, well, he was an IT engineer back home, but he didn't have an IT credential here. And I said, oh, wow, well, you could go get some. And he said, well, my situation is such where I'm supporting my family. I don't have. Well, at the end of the day, and it wasn't a lot of money, I made a decision to send him a check to pay for getting his IT certification. He had the skills. He didn't have the certification. His life changed. Now, I'm not saying, wow, Elliott was a hero there, but if I hadn't have a conversation with somebody who was in a totally different role, my driver in a taxi, I never would have realized we had something in common, which was technology and careers. And then he said, I'll pay you back. I said, no, pay it forward. When you can, go to another person who has been an immigrant and you pay some of his education or her education to do that. So I think you're right. We have to make sure, even in this age of social media where we get very siloed, break out of that silo. Look, I'm 73. I regularly love talking to 17, 22, 32, 42, 52, and 62-year-olds. Because if I just talk to people my age, I'm going to have a very narrow view. I didn't get TikTok, and I'm not a big TikTok fan, but I found an artist who I had produced on Broadway, who had a baby, who has 1.5 million TikTok viewers. Oh, wow. She and her baby do almost every day. Now, by talking to her, and I got to understand that cohort, that's one of the most exciting things that they can do. Not my style, but if I'm going to be in the world of learning, it can't just be about my style. I've got to be in a broader role. But you've got to have the relationships that open up those doors for you.
And I think you bring in a very interesting point that we automatically assume that because I learned by reading a book, that's the only way to learn. And it's not. I mean, it can be podcast, can be TikTok, and there are enough people who are doing that. Of course, there are enough people selling snake oil as well on TikTok. Yeah. But then you have enough people selling snake oil in the classroom as well. So I want to shift the conversation to your skill in storytelling. I have particularly enjoyed a lot of your videos because they really create a story around something fairly profound, but it doesn't come across as pompous or, wow, I'm going to now give you this piece of wisdom. It's really not. How do I become a better storyteller? What is your method of doing that?
Well, first of all, I always ask every celebrity or well-known person I've ever interviewed, I always ask them, tell me about how you learned storytelling, whether it was Michelle Obama or Malcolm Gladwell or Steve Wozniak or other people from other roles. And almost inevitably, they point to a one generation away family member, their uncle, their aunt, their grandmother, and sitting on the floor in their house or their cabin or their tent and hearing stories. So that's one of the pieces, is that we need to go back into our roots to understand. Secondly, we need to understand that stories are songs. They're songs, but they're songs without music. The music is where your heart comes into it. And, the worst thing in the world for me is when I go to a conference and somebody bought a book called Jokes to Start My Speech With. And I go, oh my, this is going to be a long hour. When I go out to give a speech, I never know how I'm going to begin the speech till I get in the front of the stage. I go, hi there. And I see something, and I might go, wow, I love that hat. Oh, where did you buy that hat? Or I'll say something. And what happens in that moment is I become authentic rather than scripted. Okay. And there's an interesting skill set that we don't talk enough about. Maybe you and I should write something about it, because I think we could listen from both the experience you've had in India with Bollywood and entertainment and mine, which is that storytelling requires story listening. Telling requires story listening. Now, the problem, and you all have a friend, a relative, a boss, a colleague who tells a story, and they don't care if anybody is listening. I have one person who will tell that to me at lunch, and I could walk away and they're going to keep talking for 10 minutes. Story listening, I learned by talking to the president of the Mount Sinai Hospital System in New York, and he said it's really important that our doctors not only are good storytellers, but they're story listeners, even to the point of saying, here's what the results, here's what your diagnosis is. Now, tell me how you're going to tell your sister that. And you listen in that sense. That is a really important piece. But remember, I went back to the song. When you know a song, you don't know that you know all the lyrics until you start to sing it. And then the lyrics come out. So when I do storytelling, I don't have a script in front of me. I usually have 6 bullets, because I know when I hear that bullet, it triggers the conversation that I want. But I am looking at that audience. I'm engaging with that audience. And finally, what you have to realize that your ability to tell a story is much longer than their ability to actively listen to a story. Very often when I'm doing interviews for CEO or another job, I'll bring one of those digital clocks in. I go, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You have 180 seconds to answer it, and the clock's showing. And they freak out initially. I tell them, I really want to hear the answer in 3 minutes, and I kind of warn them ahead of time. But I really believe this is a skill that you can get better at. You have to get feedback. And don't think by watching yourself on TV, you're going to get better, because you'll watch the way you thought you were, not the way you are. And it's not about being pretty or handsome or having a perfect voice or having precise sentences. It's about, are you real? Are you authentic? And to follow from Chris, who's the head of the TED organization, is he said, tell a story that has a natural curve. It starts, it gets to the big point, and then it comes to an ending that pulls it together nicely. And they used to, when TED Talks started, they were an hour, then they became a half an hour, then 18 minutes. TEDx Talks now are 12 or 6 minutes long, because they found that the duration of the story is inversely related to the impact of the story. So sometimes shorter is way, 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 way better.
And that also explains why when you watch a lot of improv comedians, their improv artists will pick out something in real time. They'll start off by saying that today while coming across this, this happened at the door, and then they'll build a story around that, and then they take it from there, which is so essential.
I hired General Colin Powell to come and speak. And I hired him once before, 4 or 5 years early. And he's a wonderful man. His daughter is a Broadway star. And he came in and he was ready to give his speech. And he turns to me about 10 minutes before, he says, you don't want me to give my speech? I go, no. Get up there and have a conversation with me and the audience. And he gets up there and he goes, hi there, I'm Colin Powell. I'm from the Bronx. Any of you from the Bronx? And 4 or 5 women yell, where are you living? And it was the best speech he ever made. It was dynamic. And by the way, he got all the good points into it, but it felt like a natural conversation with an audience of 2,000 people. That takes guts and permission, to do that. But that is some of the, I worry sometimes when you see some of the CEOs of tech companies and you see them and they're out there in their black shirt and their pants. They've rehearsed it 44 times and the like, and I'm always wishing that the teleprompter would get stuck or something like that. I remember Steve Scully, when he headed up Apple, was lowered to the Boston stage and the hoist got stuck halfway down. It was a great moment. He made it safely to the stage, but it doesn't come from memorization. It comes from authentication, that you've got to be authentic in that process.
How do you build authenticity? Is that something you practice and get, or do you kind of take those lists and do it?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. I mean, we're friends, so I'll say number one is you really look out at the audience and you realize they're just like you. They go to the bathroom. They sleep in pajamas at night. They have good mornings and bad mornings. So you have to eliminate the differentiation between you and who you're talking to, that we're very similar. We have to be in different roles, but we're very similar. And the other piece is that you have to not go back to your memory, but you go back to your experience. It's one thing if somebody said, Elliott, what's your favorite Broadway show? I could tell you what I've memorized to say. And then it would come to me and I go, I was in the Longacre Theater on 48th Street the first night that the prom was there. I remember when Caitlin Kinnunen took her guitar and she strummed it, and without any other background, the theater came alive about kids who were outliers. That was my best moment of theater. Now, what I just said is what I said. I went back to experience that. I could have given you the words I've said before, but to be authentic, I had to go there. I had to emotionally go there. It's one of the things, by the way, I've always loved I've been to India many times. I always love watching a film at the end where all of the actors dance, because no matter what their role was, in the end, they're celebrating that they did this amazing show together. And is it staged? Yes. Is it hyper rehearsed? Probably not. It's of that moment. It's living that experience.
This is why I kind of believe that the business world would be so much better if we learn from the performing art. In the business world, everybody says, oh, there is no hierarchy, and, I'm just like you. But, it is really pretty real. Whereas in the performing world, your experience means nothing, because you could have done 50 successful shows and the 51st could bomb. And, it's a bit like sports. It's real time. It happens, and the audience may not laugh at the best line that you thought was there, and they might figure at something which you didn't even think was funny. It was just something you thought of at that moment. So that's the spontaneity that you build in.
Last night, we had staying here a friend who is on a tour of a Broadway show called The Girl from the North Country. It's music by Bob Dylan. It's got a sad story in it. Well, they're touring the United States, and they're going to go to D.C. next. And literally the day that it started, yesterday, about 20 minutes before the show started, they found out that one of their lead actresses was sick and couldn't sing. So they turned to her understudy, who had never done this role on stage. She had been rehearsing it, and said, in 20 minutes, you have to go out and play that role. And I watched it last night. Now, I knew that she was the understudy. She was amazing. I will tell you, she probably was better than the person she replaced, because at that moment, this was her moment. Now, we think about that in the world of business. How do we find that time when you step up to the moment, when you're there? I teach a lot of MBA students. I tell them, when somebody asks you a question, occasionally say, let me think about that for 2 minutes, and I want to then tell you the answer. And get quiet and think about it and go inside yourself. Don't think this is a quiz show game. I got to give my quick, Morgan Stanley answer in 14 seconds. And when they take those 2 minutes, you go, that was real. So I'm with you. I think what we do in the performing arts, we need to bring there. I think we need to honor what we've learned in our religions, what we've learned in our cultures, what we've learned from our families and from our communities. Absolutely.
And that is what truly is about bringing your best self to work, your entire self to work, all the aspects of yourself, the strength and the weakness. And not be afraid to call it a weakness, because that's the other thing, that we've almost stopped thinking of anything as a weakness. So yes, it's nice to think of it as a developmental opportunity, but, if you don't confront it yourself, how are you ever going to sort of address it?
And you and I know we're both collaborating on this. We're really interested in bringing the world of learning and bringing it more into the world of human resources. And we're in collaboration with the SHRM organization. And the reason I want to do that goes way back to the research my colleague Josh Person has done. People aren't leaving jobs to get more money. They're usually leaving a job because they want to go someplace where they can learn and be developed. And so I really believe no matter where we are in this talent field, we ultimately are about growing the talent base, the skill base, the career base of the people that are with us. And every now and then you look at somebody and you go, you're doing a fine job, but I have a sense that you're not growing in this job. Would you like to? And maybe they're at a year when they don't want to grow and do some, and that's fine. But it is really important for us to make sure that the world of HR isn't just about benefits, compliance, and those elements, but is really about skilling and growing skills and building careers and building a lifelong pathway of life success, which makes them easier to be part of organizational success.
And which is where, you really think of really taking up this whole challenge of recreating organizations which create joy in the employee. You look forward to the day. You don't kind of say that, oh my God, today is a Monday. And you don't kind of say, yes, today is a Friday and the weekend is here. Because, why is it that you have this kind of a distribution? When you think of your career, how much of it was shaped by the skills that you had? How much of it was shaped by the relationships that you had? And
I think relationships are a big piece of it. I feel really fortunate that I've gotten to know many amazing people, some of them very, very famous and some of them not famous, but equally powerful. I also think it comes from allowing yourself to be excited by things. And this is aiming at curiosity. Every time you and I speak, I think of something else I want to talk to you about or read, and allowing yourself to be this curious boy. I mean, I tell people I'm a 73-year-old curious boy, and now I have enough money to buy the books that I want to buy or to have the conversations, but enabling yourself to get excited and to then be impacted by people. And then ironically, if you're with a diverse set of people, it will lead to experiences. In 2006, I went to Africa and gave out malaria nets in Mali. And one of the people on board was Malcolm X's third youngest daughter. Now, we hadn't spoken in about 15 years. And a couple months ago, we connected. And I got invited to Malcolm X's 90th birthday party with Spike Lee at the door welcoming me. And I was not because I was an important person, but I had created a relationship that led to experiences. So value the people that you know, and you never know. You never know what can come out of that relationship.
Which is very different from how people view networking. Networking is because you hang around with somebody or you connect with somebody as long as you are going to get something from that person. Whereas what you are describing is how do you sort of really build authenticity in the work that you do, in the relationships, and even the storytelling that you do. All of them really have the core foundation of authenticity. We are sort of really coming to the last couple of minutes of our show. You've written 12 books. How do you write a book? If somebody wants to write a book, what is your 2 or 3 big tips?
Write a paragraph, show it to people. If they like it, write a page, show it to people. If they like it, go write an article. And an article can be 3 pages, 4 pages. Now, for 99% of you, stop there because you have enough for an article. Now, and you know this, and I know this very well, getting it from an article to a book is a lot of work. And in some cases, stop at an article because a lot of people may not read the book. But if you want to go to a book, then you need to really think about it, what we've been talking about, the storytelling. What's the arc of the story? And realize one of the challenges right now is that people are into very immediate consumption of things. So be prepared to write the book. My friend Jennifer just wrote a wonderful book about women as CLOs. Well, the next thing she needed to do, she needed to read the book because it's an audio book. And then she went on her book tour that she's on now, which is not simple, but you're going to dozens, if not hundreds of places and promoting it. But literally start with that paragraph, that page, that article. And then if it's right, it becomes a book. Or you can do what I did for a few of my books, make them an anthology, where I wrote the beginning. I figured out 12 chapters. I went to 11 other people to write the chapters. And It was easier for me and bluntly, probably better than if I had written all 12. Do that. And the one thing to keep in mind is it doesn't have to get commercially published to be of value. It's wonderful if it gets commercially published. But you put that article, I wish in our learning and HR field, every day we had people writing summaries and autopsies of things they did. We tried to change onboarding. It totally didn't work. This is what happened.
Yeah.
Or we changed the way in which we do our employee interviews, and it worked. And I wish that every day I could find 100 of those articles on board to read, not just waiting for the book called Perfect Onboarding, or 1,000 tips for interviews. I wish we had a way of sharing our knowledge and our ahas in real time.
Thank you so very much, Elliott. It's just so fascinating to see the 73-year-old boy whose curiosity extends from learning, technology, being a geek, people, celebs, ordinary people, taxi drivers, storytelling. What a phenomenal journey it's been. I am so grateful that you came and shared your wisdom with all my viewers, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can, write to me at abhijitbhaduri@live.com. And who knows, if your story is interesting, we'd love to share it with a larger number of people. On that note, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.